The Red Valley Plantation stretched across nearly 200 acres of blistering southern soil. The land, once peaceful, held a history of blood, pain, and generations of broken families. At its center stood a mansion of white columns and polished cedar floors, beautiful from a distance. But to the enslaved people forced to work the fields beneath it, the house was no more than a throne of cruelty. In those fields walked a boy named Malachi, 11 years old, small for his age and painfully thin. His ribs pressed against his skin, each breath revealing how hunger clung to his belly. But his eyes, they carried a fire brighter than the sun beating down on his back. They carried something dangerous, the refusal to break. Malachi's mother, Ada, had given him one lesson before she fell ill and was dragged away to the sick cabin weeks earlier, never to return. A broken body can be healed. A broken spirit cannot. Protect your spirit, Malachi. Those words echoed in him like a heartbeat. Every day Malachi worked under the eyes of 3 overseers. Briggs, the meanest, tall and red-faced, with a whip that struck faster than lightning. Duke, younger, cruel out of insecurity, taking pleasure in harming those smaller than him. Harper, silent but deadly, the one who always watched, waiting, calculating. Together they controlled over 50 enslaved people. But they hated Malachi most, not because he was defiant but because he refused to fear them. Fear fed overseers. And Malachi starved them. One blistering afternoon, Briggs grew irritated watching Malachi lift bags of cotton barely the size of his chest. The boy strained, his arms shaking, sweat dripping into his eyes. But he never complained. Not once. Briggs walked toward him, whip dangling lazily at his side. "You think you're strong?" Briggs hissed. "You think you special?" Malachi didn't answer. That was his quiet rebellion. Briggs grabbed Malachi's wrist hard, too hard. "Say something, boy." Malachi stared at him with the same unblinking calm he always had. Something in that stillness enraged Briggs. It was the look of someone who refused to break. The whip cracked across Malachi's back. Once, twice, again. Each strike tore fire into his skin. Pain surged through him like molten steel, but his mother's voice, "Protect your spirit," kept him upright, kept him breathing. The other enslaved people looked away, not out of coldness but survival. To stare too long meant punishment. Pity was a luxury none could afford. Briggs struck again, furious that Malachi wouldn't scream. But Malachi didn't break. When Briggs finally stormed off, Duke approached, snickering. "Ain't no point pretending you tough," he whispered. "You just too dumb to know when to holler." Malachi didn't move. Harper, watching from his horse, murmured to Duke, "That boy gonna be trouble one day. Mark me. Trouble." That was the first time someone predicted Malachi's destiny. That night, while the others slept on dirt floors, Malachi crawled behind the storage shed near the tool house. Tears streamed down his face, silent, burning, unstoppable tears. He finally let the pain spill out, knowing no one could hear him. He grabbed 2 large stones from the ground, smooth from the river, heavy in his hands. He squeezed them until his fingers ached. Not because he wanted revenge, but because he needed power. Control. Something he could hold when the world gave him nothing. That moment was the birth of the legend of Malachi. But he didn't know it yet. The next day brought a storm, not from the sky but from the cruel hearts of the overseers. And that storm would ignite the fire that would take 3 lives. It started with a mistake. A simple, innocent mistake. But on Red Valley Plantation, a mistake could cost your life. Or unleash a legend that would echo through generations. The sun rose angry the next morning, burning orange, thick in the sky, pressing down on the fields like a hand determined to crush everything beneath it. The air was heavy, unmoving, so hot it felt like the world itself was trying to suffocate. Malachi walked to the field slower than usual. Not because his body hurt, though it did. Not because his back burned, though it burned. Not because fear held him. But because something weighed heavier than pain, heavier than hunger. The stones he'd taken the night before were tucked under the brush behind the storage shed. He'd hidden them like forbidden treasure, 2 curved river stones that fit his palms as if made for him. His secret. His strength. The only things in this world that belonged to him. As he reached the field, the others noticed his pace. Nobody spoke, but they saw something different in his face. Something sharpened, something set like flint. An older man named Jonah whispered under his breath, "Child got fire in his spine today." But before anyone could say more, Duke came stomping across the rows, muttering angrily, kicking up dirt with every step. His anger wasn't about Malachi, not at first. Duke's temper had been simmering all morning after a heated argument with Briggs. Overseers rarely argued, but when they did, their cruelty only worsened. And that cruelty needed somewhere to land. Duke saw Malachi, the smallest figure in the field, and like lightning, the anger found its target. "You," Duke snapped. "Bring your skinny hide over here. Now." Malachi didn't move at first. Not out of defiance, out of calculation. He had seen this look before. The wild, unfocused anger. The kind that turned men into storms. Slowly he walked toward Duke. Duke grabbed him by the collar and yanked him forward. "You were supposed to stack the baskets tight, not loose." Now they all toppled. Malachi blinked once. "Come." Silent. That only fueled Duke further. "You think you can just do things your own way? Think you better than the rest?" He shoved Malachi hard against a post. "You ain't nothing. You hear me? Nothing." The other enslaved workers froze. Nobody breathed. Even Briggs noticed the commotion from across the field but didn't intervene. Watching Duke vent his rage was easier than controlling him. Duke reached for his whip. Not the long leather one used in the fields. The short one. The personal one. The one he only used when he wanted to hurt someone, not discipline. Malachi's pulse thudded once, then steadied. His mother's words echoed again. "Protect your spirit." Duke drew back the whip. Malachi ducked. Fast. Instinctive. Natural. Fluid as water. The whip cracked against the post instead of his skin. The sound echoed across the field like thunder. Duke froze. For a moment, shock overtook rage. "You dumb little." He swung again. Malachi dodged again. This time, workers gasped quietly. Not because Malachi moved quickly, but because he dared to move at all. Duke screamed in fury. "You think you can run?" he bellowed. He lunged. Malachi didn't run. He slipped from Duke's reach and sprinted toward the tool shed, toward the stones he'd hidden. Duke chased him, stumbling, tripping, fueled by rage rather than strategy. Malachi reached the back of the shed. Dropped to his knees. Grabbed the stones. The weight of them filled him, calming, centering, grounding. Duke barreled around the corner, panting, spit flying from his mouth. "Put those down," he roared. Malachi didn't. Duke swung the whip at his face. Malachi lifted his forearm. The whip wrapped around it. He winced but held firm. And with his other hand clutching one stone, he struck Duke's wrist. A single clean crack. Duke yelped and dropped the whip. Malachi didn't hesitate. He backed away, clutching both stones, tears forming but not from fear. From release. From remembering every bruise. Every hunger. Every night he wondered if he'd survive morning. Duke clutched his wrist, backing up. "You little animal." But Malachi stepped forward. For the first time in his life, he advanced while an overseer retreated. Duke tripped over a root and fell hard against the dirt, scrambling backward, breath shaking. Malachi didn't strike again. He didn't need to. Duke's pride was shattered. His dominance broken. His certainty of power crushed by a child holding two stones. For the first time in his years on Red Valley Plantation, an overseer tasted fear. The field workers stared from a distance, their eyes wide, their souls stirred awake. A boy had made a grown man fall. And far across the field, Briggs saw it. And his face twisted into something darker than anger. Something hateful. Something dangerous. Because he understood a truth others missed. Once one overseer fell, the others would soon follow. The plantation did not breathe for the rest of that day. Not the wind. Not the workers. Not the overseers pacing the fields like wounded wolves. Something had shifted, something invisible yet unmistakable. A boy had stood his ground. A whip had fallen. And an overseer had tasted fear. Those three truths spread across Red Valley like wildfire. No one spoke of it aloud. Silence was the first rule of survival, but the looks exchanged said everything. A line had been crossed. A new story had begun. And nothing would ever be the same. Briggs was leaning against the main barn, sharpening his long knife when Duke stumbled in, still clutching his wrist, still panting, still red-faced with humiliation. Briggs didn't look up. "You look like you lost a fight with a fence post," he muttered. Duke swallowed hard. It was that boy. Briggs paused mid-stroke. Turned his head slowly. Squinted. "What boy?" "Malachi." Briggs laughed. Not because it was funny, because he didn't believe it. "That little thing? That child who barely comes up to a mule's shoulder." Duke nodded stiffly. "He struck you?" Briggs pressed. A heavy silence. "He defied you?" Duke hesitated, humiliation thick in his voice. "He broke my wrist." Briggs blinked once. Then the sharpening knife slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. The laughter stopped. The disbelief vanished. In its place came calculation. Briggs leaned forward slowly. You listen to me, Duke. You listen close. Duke avoided his eyes. You didn't get hurt by a child, Briggs hissed. You let a child make you look weak. Duke clenched his jaw, shame burning through him. But Briggs wasn't done. And weakness. Briggs continued, standing to his full height. Spreads like disease. His boots hit the barn floor like hammer strokes as he stepped closer. We handle this quiet. Cling. Final. That boy is getting put down before this spreads. Duke swallowed. Master Hawthorne. Master Hawthorne doesn't need to know, Briggs snapped. Not until after it's handled. His voice dropped into a low growl. Tonight. After supper. Behind the storage shed. No witnesses. Duke shivered, not from fear of pain but of consequences. Because Briggs wasn't planning punishment. He was planning an execution. When the workers were dismissed for the afternoon, Malachi felt something colder than fear settle in the pit of his stomach. Eyes were on him. Not the frightened, awestruck eyes of the enslaved workers. The other eyes. Predatory eyes. The overseers watched him differently now, quietly, too quietly. Their expressions less angry and more focused. Like hunters marking a wounded animal. Old Jonah noticed it too. He stepped beside Malachi while pretending to scrub a barrel. What you did took guts, Jonah whispered, eyes forward. But guts come with a price. Malachi stayed silent. Briggs don't let things like this rest, Jonah added. You understand me? Malachi nodded. But he didn't fear Briggs. He feared what Briggs represented. The truth that courage was costly. And survival demanded choice. Later that evening, Malachi slipped behind the shed to retrieve his stones. Going back for them was risky, but leaving them behind was worse. He crouched near the brush, brushing dirt aside until his fingers found the familiar weight. But as soon as he closed his hand around them, a twig snapped behind him. Malachi froze. A second snap. Then a third. Voices. Oh, Mal. Getting closer. And Briggs. Malachi's heart thudded once. Then again. Jonah had been right. They weren't waiting for punishment. They were waiting for darkness. And darkness had arrived. Briggs stepped out first, the moonlight striking the metal of his belt buckle like a cold star. Duke came next, cradling his injured wrist, the other hand gripping a rope. Briggs smiled. Not a grin. Not a smirk. A smile with no warmth, no emotion, just certainty. You should have run, boy. Malachi stood slowly. His hands tightened around the stones. His breath steadied. His mind sharpened. Briggs took a step forward. Duke flanked the other side. Hold still, Briggs muttered. I'll make it quick. Malachi didn't move. Not because he was frozen, but because time itself seemed to stop. The grass stilled. The night hushed. His heartbeat slowed until he could hear each thump like thunder in his veins. His mother's voice filled his mind, clearer than it had been in years. You are not weak, Malachi. You are not small. You are your father's son. He lifted the stones. Briggs noticed and laughed. You gonna throw those at me, boy? Malachi didn't answer. Briggs took one more step. And in that instant, Malachi made a decision that would carve his place into the whispered history of every slave who ever dreamed of freedom. He moved. Fast. Faster than Briggs expected. Faster than Duke could process. Faster than fear could hold him back. He launched the first stone. And the world exploded. The stone left Malachi's hand with the force of a lifetime of swallowed rage. It didn't arc. It didn't wobble. It cut through the air like it had been waiting for this moment since the day Malachi was born. Briggs barely had time to blink. Thud. The sound was sickening, bone-meeting destiny. The stone struck him squarely above the brow, right between the eyes. His head snapped back. His jaw dropped. His knees trembled. For a heartbeat he didn't fall. He just stood there. Eyes empty. Mouth slack. Body refusing to accept the truth. Then the truth claimed him. Briggs collapsed like a felled oak, the ground shaking beneath his weight. He hit the dirt with a lifeless thud that echoed through the woods. Malachi didn't watch him drop. He was already turning. Because Duke had screamed. Duke stumbled back so hard he tripped over a root and fell onto his elbows. His breath came out in broken gasps. His eyes bulged. His mouth snapped open and shut like a dying fish. The rope fell from his hands. You killed him, he shrieked. Malachi said nothing. But the stones in his hands glistened under the moon like wet lightning. Duke's terror curdled into fury. He pushed himself up, teeth bared. I'll get you for this. He lunged forward, grabbing for Malachi's shirt. Malachi dodged, stepping aside with the speed of a boy who had dodged whips his whole life. Duke stumbled past him. Malachi pivoted, raised the second stone, and brought it crashing down on Duke's jaw. Crack. The sound made Malachi flinch, but only for a moment. Duke crumpled sideways, howling in pain, clutching his shattered jaw. "You little demon," he slurred. His words were thick with blood. Malachi didn't respond. He couldn't. His heart was pounding too loudly, his vision trembling, his mind screaming one thing: if you don't finish him, he will finish you. Duke lunged again, sloppy, desperate. Malachi dodged again. Duke grabbed for his ankle. Malachi kicked him. Duke grabbed harder. Malachi stomped on his fingers. Duke screamed. The scream turned into a manic roar. He hurled himself forward, arms wide, trying to tackle Malachi to the ground. Malachi felt his world blur. His mother's voice. His father's laugh. Jonah's warnings. The children waiting for hope. The whip cracking in his nightmares. Everything collided inside him. And his hand rose on instinct. The stone came down again. Once. Twice. 3 times. Until Duke's roar faded into a wet gurgle. Malachi stood above him, trembling, breathing in sharp, painful bursts. Duke lay still. Completely still. A silence fell so heavy it felt like a physical thing pressing against Malachi's chest. Then slowly, his grip loosened. The stone slipped from his hand, and he whispered, barely audible, "I didn't ask for this." But the night didn't care, because whether he wanted it or not, Malachi had crossed another line. Malachi staggered back, dizzy, heart pounding like a drum inside a tight drum. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Heavy. Fast. Getting closer. Not running. Charging. Tomlin. The third overseer. The cruelest of the 3. He burst into the clearing like a beast set loose. His eyes saw Duke. Then Briggs. Then Malachi. And his face contorted into something monstrous. "You little rat." He ripped the whip from his belt, and Malachi felt a raw, primal fear slam through him. Not of pain. Pain he knew. Pain he understood. No. He feared what Tomlin represented. A lifetime of men who believed children were powerless. Tomlin snapped the whip so hard the air cracked. Malachi ducked. The tip sliced a branch clean off a tree. Tomlin advanced, panting, snarling. "You think you can kill MY men? You think you can kill me?" Malachi backed toward Briggs' body, toward the place the first stone had fallen. His foot brushed something heavy. Another stone. Not his. Bigger. Jagged at one end. Tomlin stalked closer. "Beg," he growled. "Beg like the dog you are." Malachi didn't beg. He lifted the stone. Tomlin froze. "You." Malachi charged. The shout that tore from his lungs was not human. It was ancient. It was desperate. It was survival itself. Tomlin whipped the air. But Malachi was already inside the strike zone. He slammed the stone into Tomlin's ribs. Crack. Tomlin folded, gasping. Malachi struck again. And again. And again. The whip fell from Tomlin's hand. He dropped to his knees. The hatred on his face twisted into disbelief. You ain't even grown?" Malachi stepped back. He didn't want another strike. He didn't want another death. But Tomlin lunged, one last desperate attempt, fingers reaching for Malachi's throat. Malachi reacted. The stone struck Tomlin's temple with a final, hollow impact. Tomlin dropped. And this time, he did not rise. The clearing was silent. 3 overseers lay dead. Malachi stood over them. Not triumphant, not proud, but transformed. He had done what no one in Red Valley had dared. He had broken the circle. Broken the order. Broken the myth that overseers were untouchable. He had done the impossible. But impossible deeds carry heavy consequences. And the plantation would wake tomorrow. To a storm like none it had ever known. Because the sun would rise over Red Valley. To the legend of a boy with stones. Dawn did not arrive gently the next morning. It came like a blade slicing through the dying night. Sharp, exposing, unforgiving. And in its pale light, everything changed. The 3 overseers still lay where they'd fallen, their bodies stark against the dirt. No one had touched them. No one dared. The first to find them was Ruth, working the morning water line, humming softly to herself, unaware of the nightmare she was walking toward. Her scream cracked through the early air like lightning. Within minutes, the plantation erupted. Workers ran to their quarters. Overseers stormed out of their cabins. Dogs barked. Horses kicked their stalls. Word spread faster than footsteps. 3 overseers dead. 3 bodies behind the shed. Killed with stones. A boy did it. At first no one believed it. Then they saw Malachi, standing alone by the shed, clothes smeared with dirt and blood, eyes hollow yet steady, hands empty but trembling. And that was when the truth, the impossible truth, settled across Red Valley like a ghostly fog. The boy had survived. The overseers had not. Master Hawthorne was pulled from his breakfast by Briggs' assistant, a lanky, nervous man named Shep, who burst into the dining hall so violently that Hawthorne nearly overturned his coffee. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Hawthorne barked. Shep stammered. "Sir, there's been a situation." Hawthorne stood. "What situation?" It's the overseers, sir. They're dead." Hawthorne froze. "Dead?" His voice cracked on the word. Shep nodded frantically. "All three, sir." Hawthorne's face went pale. "How?" Shep swallowed. "They say it was a boy." "What boy?" "Malachi. The Turner boy." Hawthorne's jaw clenched. His eyes twitched. A strange mixture of fury and fascination washed over him. He whispered to himself, "That child survived the Canefield collapse, survived the whippings, and now this?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then he growled, "Bring him to me." As Malachi was seized and dragged toward the big house, the enslaved workers watched from behind barrels, wagon wheels, cracked doors, and cabin windows. Not with fear. Not with pity. With awe. No one had ever done what he had done. Not a grown man. Not a runaway returned. Not even all the whisper-filled legends. Malachi Turner, a boy, had slain 3 overseers. Jonah's old eyes filled with tears. Ruth covered her mouth to hide her trembling smile. Even the children, dirty, thin, exhausted, stood taller that morning. Because someone had shattered the myth. Someone had broken the chain. Someone had proved overseers could bleed. And if they could bleed, they could fall. They dragged Malachi into the parlor where Hawthorne sat waiting, hands clasped behind his back. He studied Malachi with the cold fascination of a man examining a dangerous animal. Finally he spoke. "You killed 3 of my men." Malachi didn't answer. Hawthorne stepped closer. "You used stones." Still no answer. "You are small but you are effective." The word effective dripped with both admiration and disgust. "You should be dead," Hawthorne said calmly. "Yet here you stand." Malachi's jaw tightened. Hawthorne tilted his head. "Do you understand what you've done?" Still silence. "Briggs was worth $40, Hawthorne hissed. "Duke 35. Tomlin 38. His voice sharpened. "You owe me over $100, boy." A beat. Then Hawthorne delivered the sentence. "You will be whipped until your blood wets the dirt. Then you will be hanged. And then your body will be displayed as a warning." The words were cold enough to frost the air. Malachi lifted his head. And for the first time he spoke. "I ain't afraid." Hawthorne blinked. "What did you say?" Malachi's voice was steady. "You can whip me. You can hang me. But what's done is done. And they ain't coming back." Hawthorne's nostrils flared. "You insolent little—" But he didn't finish. Because shouting erupted outside. The workers had gathered. Dozens of them. Men, women, elders, children. Not armed, with anything but their hands and their anger. Jonah stood at the front, leaning on his cane. Ruth beside him. Samuel. Betsy. Even the smallest children stood there, fists clenched. The crowd moved like a single being, breathing the same breath, thinking the same thought. If they kill the boy, they kill the hope. Inside the house, Hawthorne froze. He had never seen the workers gathered like this. Never seen them united. Never seen their eyes burning with something more dangerous than rebellion. Conviction. Shep rushed inside. Sir, they're demanding you release the boy." Hawthorne's face contorted with rage. They dare? But even he could see the danger. Kill a man? The plantation continued. Kill a woman? Fear increased. Kill a child who'd slain 3 overseers? The plantation would burn. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But the spark had already been lit. Hawthorne hissed. "Release him." Malachi was shoved out the front door. But he didn't fall. The crowd parted. Old Jonah reached him first, gripping his shoulders. "You've done something no one else ever had the courage to do," Jonah whispered. Ruth knelt beside him. "You ain't alone no more." The children gathered around his legs like frightened chicks seeking the bravest among them. And for the first time since the night began, Malachi felt air return to his lungs. He didn't feel strong, or heroic, or victorious. He felt something deeper. See. That night, whispers rolled across Red Valley. Some called him the Stone Boy. Others, the overseer slayer. Some simply said, Malachi Turner done changed everything. And they were right. Because from that day on, the overseers patrolled less confidently. The workers lifted their heads a little higher. The children slept with dreams instead of fear. Malachi had rewritten the laws of the plantation. He had shown that strength was not measured in size, that weapons were not forged from steel, that courage could live in the smallest chest. He had proven the impossible. And long after the fields were silent, long after the fires burned low, long after the slaves whispered their prayers, the name Malachi Turner traveled across every quarter. A legend, a warning, a spark, a boy who killed 3 overseers with stones, and reminded the world, even in chains, a warrior can rise. If Malachi's story moved you, his courage, his fury, his impossible stand, then I invite you to join us on Hidden Tales, where forgotten heroes rise again. Subscribe, turn on all notifications, and step deeper into the stories history tried to silence. This is Hidden Tales, where legends never die.